right, so now we are going to have a session which is 100% online, and I hope that Simon and Nadiya are already on Zoom. All right, so Simon, can you hear us? Hello? All right, so until we wait for Simon, once again, I'm reminding you about 7 o'clock tonight. So be down in the lobby to be picked up by the bus. In the meantime, Simon, I think he's already online. Simon, can you hear us now? Hello, you are muted.
Yes, but I could hear you before.
All right, so like it's very interesting over here. How's the weather in Switzerland right now?
Fabulous, we're melting.
All right, so Nadiya should be here any moment. In the meantime, you can start introducing the fireside chat format, and we will be here watching you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sultan. It's a pleasure being again with you, this time remotely after I visited in person the last edition. Really pleased to have you all here live and remotely. I'm going to say a few words about the fireside format and then introduce our today's guest and tell you a bit in advance about the topics that we are going to discover. So as you might know, we've introduced this format to Sultan's conference series, and it has become a classic, and we try to kind of deepen a few topics in each session with each guest, and we have typically very senior guests, and I'm also very happy about today's guest that we're having. And I should say a few words right away about our special guest, Nadiya Attard. Many of you will know her, be it through direct business relations or then also from conferences. Nadiya nowadays serves as the Chief Commercial Officer at Relax Gaming. So that's obviously a supplier, game supplier, a well-renowned game supplier in the field. And before that, Nadiya held various different positions, such as with Betfair and later on with NetEnt, where she was for almost 5 years the Director of Business Development. So it's fair to say Nadiya has a wealth of experience, hands-on experience in the gambling industry in various roles. Maybe a few words about her background. There's also a couple of interesting things to discover about Nadiya. So she holds a bachelor in business and managerial economics, and more interestingly, a master in applied mathematics. So I would trust that Nadiya actually understands also very well the technical side or the technical aspects of the games that she works with. We are going to approach today a few themes, including the following. We will speak about the old times, some might say the good old times, of being an operator. How was it actually in times that we might hardly remember when we look at many of the restrictions that the gambling industry is facing nowadays? We will also speak about comparatively the US market and the European market. We will also mention a few examples of good regulation and maybe raise the question also, to which extent do actually regulations really serve policy goals? And finally, we will have a look at how the gaming market and notably suppliers in the gaming market have evolved over the last decade or so. So this should actually serve as a rich menu, Nadiya, for our discussion today. And I'm very pleased to have you today. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you guys for hosting me as well. It's really nice. Unfortunately, I cannot see you guys, but it's really nice to meet you all virtually. And I feel really bad that I cannot join like with you in person because I love Prague. I love gaming summits that Zoltan is hosting, and I really hope I can see you around on the next conference in person in real life. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, Simon, as well. It's really nice.
Most welcome, Nadiya. We've known each other for many years indeed, and it's always been a pleasure discussing about especially gaming and industry matters with you, since you're very knowledgeable about the field. So I did mention briefly one of our topics, the good old times of being an operator. About a decade ago, you did actually work for Betfair. At the time, it was still called Betfair. And I was wondering whether we could speak a bit as a first topic about some of the incredible differences between acting as a B2C at the time, and then compare it to how this picture looks nowadays.
Sure, very different, I can admit. I think everybody can agree here that the landscape completely changed, and the ecosystem nowadays, it's very, very different. But I don't know if you have any specific questions you would like to start with, so it's just an open discussion.
I'm sure you have a wealth of anecdotes and experiences from both the past and the present that will allow us to contrast these times.
I actually wanted to start from something different, not from my work experience, but my first experience with Zoltan, if I would like to start on the funny thing. So Zoltan was hosting events, and the first conference, I'm not sure if you've been around or not that time, but it was actually in Budapest, and within 1 hour from the conference, we had a bomb threat in hotel. It was Hilton Hotel. And actually we had to leave everything and we had to evacuate. So the thing is, it was really interesting subject because Hungary was getting regulated. So that was the whole reason why it was held in Budapest, and we had to drop everything. And I learned a lot from the time. So since I stayed in the same hotel where the conference was, I just went down with notebook, pen, and business cards. So it was September, it was really cold. I didn't have any money. There was no like Apple Pay or everything on iPhones back then. So we literally had to stay all day outside. Customers were paying for my lunches and everything. It was really interesting experience. And then actually all the participants stayed in the evening, and we had a nice, really quick catch up in the dinner at hotel. And I think since then everybody knows each other. It's more like a family relations rather than business conference. So
well, if I'm checking the conference locations now on the picture, it looks rather stable. I don't hear an alert going on in the back, and also Zoltan seems rather relaxed in his seat currently. So I'm positive there is no alert currently going on.
Back to B2C and Betfair, it was totally different. That's why I recently travel a lot to US, because our company is applying for US license, and US is a big hot topic right now for every operators and suppliers as well. And that reminds me Europe like in good old days, like 15, 20 years ago, where basically the market was regulated. There was a Curacao license, there was MGA license back then. I think Italian license was just coming on horizon, and things were open. So as long as you have a license, as long as you comply with rules and regulations, you can do what you want. You can do marketing. There was no restrictions on bets, there was no restrictions on wins, there was no restrictions on what type of players you can tell. Of course, responsible gaming and other things were important, but there was no like regulations. Oh, this is a child looking game, or for example, you cannot give your player more than certain amount of bonus money, or even restrictions you can't market like we have in specific countries or jurisdictions at the moment. So it was really good. It was very, very fun. You can do a lot of things. I remember we were sitting in Malta, and we were responsible for sports, of course. It was a sporting betting exchange. There was poker, there was a casino, and casino back then was not allowed. We couldn't, even as an employees, we couldn't open it from Malta office because we had hostings in Malta. So it was very interesting to discuss with customers casino without seeing a casino back then. So some interesting stories, but I miss all these old good days, and US in a way resembles those things. So in US, as long as you have a license in specific state, as long as you pay your taxes, as long as you comply with regulations, which are not hard, it's hard to get into US. They check a lot of documents. In fact, I'm doing my personal US due diligence as we speak right now. But when it comes to the company, the playground is open. You know, you pay your taxes, you comply with regulation, and you can do, you know, how you feel like doing what you think is right. Which to a certain extent, I also think it's a bit too much. As I mentioned you last week, I always heard a lot that many operators are not making any money in US, and yet US is such a hot subject for every company. So I was always wondering why. So I only understood it like a few months back.
We will touch back on the US in a moment, if you allow, and let's deepen a few of these old times aspects a bit more. As they used to be in Europe. You mentioned correctly, Italy was one of the first movers. I remember very well, actually, Italy's opening to a liberal licensing model was actually heavily influenced by a series of court decisions at the European Court of Justice.
Yeah.
And the Italian courts, actually in the beginning, in the early days of the gambling case law, you almost got the impression that only Italian cases coming to the court, and as a consequence, Italy really opened up and became one of the first, if not the very first, European market to offer a liberal online licensing system. So court decisions do actually have an impact, as I might add also on a sidekick in relation to the Swedish case, right, which also opened up under the pressure of European law. So Italy and other markets, many things would be allowed that would be allowed otherwise later. Let's take deposits as an example. Would you agree that back then it was possible to deposit large amounts of money, say, by credit card?
Again, yes and no. So basically, Betfair was always very highly regulated company. So yes, you can deposit a lot, but of course you need to pass KYC and you need to show proof of funds. So which is, again, I believe it's a fair thing. As long as you can show proof of funds, you can do things, you can deposit. Nowadays, like if you compare to the upcoming UK regulation where they suggest affordability check, it's not even if you can deposit. It's like unless you pass affordability check, you can bet maximum £2. And this was confirmed a few weeks ago that this regulation is upcoming. So considering how much is gambling culture is engraved into UK's DNA, it's like, what are you doing to basically you're stopping people from doing gambling, which they would like to do. So in my opinion, it will shift the market into the underground and the black market. And again, a lot of suppliers would not support, but there would be always suppliers which will support, and even like some dodgy suppliers, which is not going to make any good to the player, not to the company, to the country itself, because nobody is going to pay taxes. There would be no player protection and so on. But yeah, they push those things.
Yeah, these strict limits, which we also observe in the German market, for instance. Maybe I can illustrate why I find them highly questionable, because they actually do not address the individual situation of the player. £2 may be adequate for some players, it may not be adequate for others, because simply they do have the financial means, and it's you may raise the question, why should they be stuck at a £2 bet if they have the financial means and if they have the freedom to decide on these amounts. So when we make a comparison, for instance, to the so-called risk-based approach in AML, in the field of AML, we actually do say, yes, you should take an individual look at each case and not just have black and white solutions. This is the opposite of it, to impose strict amounts, irrespective of the person concerned indeed.
I do agree with you, and not a single company, not a supplier, not a B2C wants a problematic player. They don't want issues with AML, and nobody wants issues with responsible gaming. So every serious, especially tier 1 customer, would have specific policies and tools and monitoring the situation. So that's already very heavily addressed on each side. So having regulator on top with those strict things, it just pushes the markets into the dark more. And for example, you brought up Germany. So in Germany, even before the regulation, a lot of deposits, again, like Malta is also famous, not just for gaming, but also for crypto. So there is quite it's a large crypto hub and it's also growing. So there are a lot of companies who are dealing with cryptos. And everybody was saying that one of the biggest European countries when it comes to crypto is Germany. So out of all the revenue, sometimes 20% of total turnover for payments, it goes from Germany, and on cryptos, it goes from Germany, which raises the question why. And again, which goes to the point, if people used to gamble before the regulations, they will continue most probably gamble, but they will do it in crypto on the website which are not regulated, which are not legal. So again, not ideal scenario for the suppliers and not ideal scenario for the proper operators.
Indeed, it is not. Yeah. So we mentioned deposits before. Maybe we can, as a further example, pick up bonuses. Do you remember some of the practices back then? And if you look, if you compare them to nowadays, what is permitted and what is restricted? Maybe you can mention a few examples.
Yeah, sure. I miss the creativity. So I used to do a lot of marketing campaigns back then in my B2C part of career. And you can be as creative as you want. You can do like lots of interesting, fun things. At the moment, it's very difficult to define things. Sometimes the regulation is not defined. So it opens the room for interpretation. And the downside is that your interpretation might not always be aligned with regulators' interpretation. So we saw all those huge fines, like in a number of regulations when people didn't basically align with the bonuses. And sometimes it's related to bonuses. Sometimes it relates to features in the game. Like for example, Netherlands is a great example. So as a supplier, we do have a buy-in feature in the game, but based on maybe like 2-3 weeks ago, regulators' interpretation, buy-in features might not be allowed in the market. The same happened in UK. You can't offer buy-in feature in the game, which makes the game really boring and not fun at all. And players are simply not interested to play it. When it comes to standard bonuses, it was really fun back then. So there was a lot of again, it's good and bad things. Like there was a lot of bonuses, like, deposit, get £100 or €100, 200, whatever, buy-in bonuses, matching deposit bonuses, make a second deposit, get 500. And this can go on and on pretty much, but it was always reasonable. I would say back then, the average bonus cap was between 25 to 35% of marketing spend, which was a really decent amount. You can advertise a lot online. There was a lot of information portals, like where you can drive traffic and you can publish articles. People used to have ambassadors and everything. Nowadays, the ecosystem changed, so it's moving in the interesting directions. Like there are a lot of streamers who are streaming the thing, so it's also a type of advertisement as well. So quite a few casinos, they have the dedicated streamer who is a very famous social person and a lot of people follow. But also there are a lot of restrictions when it comes to regulators. So for example, some regulators don't allow the bonuses, some companies don't take the bonuses. And it becomes really complex, subjective, and also difficult for operators to accommodate, because if you're an operator, international one, dealing in many markets, you can't just go with one specific campaign. You have to have different campaign for different market, making sure that everything is compliant, making sure that you have read the latest rules and regulations, and it becomes really, really complex. And sometimes like you don't feel like really going ahead and promoting, you'd rather do a cross-sell between your own database if it's sports and casino and you don't move on, which is, again, it's not helping the business per se. And also one needs to understand that operator side, there is a lot of promo abuse out there. So there are bonus hunters and there are bonus hunters. For example, we built a jackpot, which coincidentally actually dropped out today, dream drop. So it dropped out this night, and it took us like over a year to develop this jackpot, but we took a lot of ideas where how can we protect the player from the promo abuse, how we can make it fair, how we make sure that like the legitimate player will win. And it took us a lot of time. And for example, the jackpot was over 1 million. It was one from €2 bet, which is yes, and the player, like I can imagine how happy was the player. But in reality, you can even win it from free spin. And we actually were working like together, make sure that there would be no jackpot syndicates or people who are actually chasing the jackpot. So it's very, very complex situation. And the same applies to the normal bonuses, because there are people, if you put low wagering conditions, for example, I had it in my career. We have like a big tier 1 customer when I was working at NetEnt, and they had like insane amount of new registration. I remember in one day the registration went like this, like skyrocket, which means like something is wrong with the bonuses straight away, because you would never have so many new players. So we started to look into it, we realized why, but you have to be really, really careful how you do bonuses, what you do. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention US yet.
We will in a moment. Before I come to the US, when I come to the US, actually, you mentioned something in relation to bonuses before. We spoke about deposits, bonuses. An important other point is the movement, I think, that you briefly alluded to, from going .com to .national, right, domain. Of course, back in the day, say we go 10, 15 years back, there were few regulated markets. You mentioned some, and for the rest, it was totally acceptable to go for .com and collecting people from all kind of countries. After Black Friday, I think the US became a less popular jurisdiction to accept clients from. But the whole idea of IP restrictions and restricting yourself in actually onboarding clients was probably less prominent than nowadays. And maybe you can say a few words also from not just operators' perspective, Nadiya, but also suppliers' perspective, because suppliers in principle are not in the first front line. They're only suppliers, right? They do not operate to the actual end customers. But these legality or illegality concerns must be also on the minds of suppliers.
It depends again, because suppliers also have, like, and there are quite a few jurisdictions where a supplier needs to have a license. And once you have a license, you need to comply with regulations. And if something is wrong, you can lose the license very easily. And nowadays, like, for example, I bring UK as example. When UK just got regulated, I like the regulation a lot. And the reason why, because the regulator was very understanding. And if there was something wrong, they will go back to you. They're like, listen, guys, we noticed this and this and this. You need to fix those things. And you fix those things, you go back to regulator, you explain them what's going on, they will check it, it's okay. Nowadays, nobody is doing it. You just receive a fine of like few millions if you're lucky. If it's like you're not lucky, it can be 100 millions. And like UK, Sweden, they just go all in, bang, which is
I do remember the early days of regulation in the UK regulated market. First authority being headed by Miss Jenny Williams, and indeed she had an open door for the industry, and also went at great length to herself also properly understand the issues. It was in a way a different atmosphere, very clearly.
Yeah, it is. And it's very nice when they advise you, because nobody, again, as I mentioned, people want to comply, but sometimes it's open to interpretation. And if something is wrong, like you won once, you won twice, if things didn't fix from the third time, of course, you get a penalty. But given the penalty on the first round and a very high, harsh penalty, it's too much, in my opinion. But again, the market, and it seems like it's shifting more to this type of approach, like fines, and people simply scared to do these things. Another downside as well is that there are some markets like where you, as a supplier, you need to have a license, and there are some markets where you don't need to have a license. And again, it all depends how much regulator is going to step up and do things. So for example, I'll bring Latvia back then, where basically, as a company, we went out for this regulated market. There is no supplier license, but then everybody else could pretty much cater for this market as well from .com scenario. And it was an open door. And sometimes it's not even up to suppliers, because it's also affiliates, it's payment solutions, and so on. So payments, I would say, it's the most important also when it comes to regulation, because if payments are not regulated, you will continue to serve the place, you will continue to serve .com customers, and then again, legitimate suppliers, legitimate casinos, they cannot benefit in the market, because the players will shift where it's more comfortable, especially if the casino was around like before. So it becomes really difficult to operate. And we saw it in Italy for a while as well, where you mentioned the court cases. It's still like one of those funny stories, because I'm still laughing thinking about it, because before it was they go to Italian court will put restrictions, but Italy is a part of European Union. They go to the European Union court, they win the case, go back again to .com. And it's been ongoing for many years until finally they drew the line and they started to combine. And only then the Italian .com actually properly shifted to .it and market picked up, because before it was back and forward, and .it on the regulated sites, it was hardly making any money for anybody. So again, there should be a grace period for people to adapt and everything, like it's happening in Germany right now. People are compliant, but it's still like a waiting list to get the license. But
yes, the trouble we see in Germany, actually similar to how it has been for many years in the Netherlands, it has taken too long. It has really taken too long. It's not acceptable to have a whole industry simply waiting in the loop, accepting essentially to stay out of the market, and politics take forever for something that is in principle a legal business activity, also recognized by the European Court of Justice as an economic activity, legitimate economic activity with its certain peculiarities that was certainly mentioned as well. But it's a bit strange to keep companies just in the loop. So we did mention a few countries, but let's go to the big country on the other side of the pond, the US. You mentioned that you're also getting licensed there. Maybe you can tell us a bit where, in which states you're getting licensed, and
I start a little bit from US as a geographical, of like America as a geographical continent. So a lot of companies from Europe, both B2Cs and B2Bs, they are targeting actually LATAM, regulated like Colombia, Mexico. Colombia is really easy to go because it's very similar to Spanish. So everybody who's going to Spain automatically is doing Colombia. Mexico is picking up as well lately, a lot, would say. And also Canada, Ontario just got regulated. So I was there on a conference, actually 2 conferences at the same time. So I just came back a week ago. It's also very interesting. And I like, actually I will bring Ontario regulation in the regard that it was one of the good regulations. It was very straightforward, relatively simple. Was a bit of a short notice, I would say, but the license is relatively cheap. There is both B2B and B2C license. People applied. It's reasonable. And as far as we see, there is no crazy restrictions as yet. So it's one of the regulations, how it should be and everything. When it comes to US, we're at the moment in process of our license application. I cannot share which state, but usual suspects, as everybody knows. You start with one, then there is another one, and there is another one, and so on. A lot of companies are applying for US right now, but what's interesting, it's more like not a supplier side, it's interesting the B2C side. So as I mentioned earlier, for me, it was always a mystery to understand, but why nobody's making any money? If the market is so huge, everybody's applying for a license, it's like a gold rush pretty much days. Everybody has to be in US. The minute you apply for a US license, your company evaluation goes through the roof and everything. And it was actually very interesting, but it's like Europe, but kind of on steroids in a way. So if in Europe, like in good old days before, you can get like maybe 100 euro deposit bonus, 200 euro deposit bonus. In US, it starts from $2,000 deposit bonus, $3,000 deposit bonus, $5,000 deposit bonus. And in addition, you can go on the luxury cruise, like you get like rooms in the luxury hotels and everything. So having with my B2C experience, couldn't understand like what's going on there. And it's a very interesting, very different market scenario. So typically, for example, in Europe, you will give reasonable bonuses. You will try to keep your marketing spend down. If there would be a new supply or new B2C coming in, they will do some aggressive marketing, 3, maximum 6 months. They will go on all the banners, all the newspapers, like everywhere they can go, basically to get like, they will go to all affiliates. They'll get a good deal, but it will last maximum 6 months. Then they will do this aggressive approach and they stop because they already got players, they have the market share and everything. In US, it's and fight for the player. I still cannot understand why, and this is actually maybe the case where we need some regulation on bonusing, because at the moment companies are spending like 200-300% on marketing. It's just something I never saw in my life. It's just crazy. Of course, suppliers are making money, but with operators, it's just like a chase who gives bigger bonuses. There are a lot of big companies, as I understand, like land-based casino and so on, but it's a big competition out there.
Yeah,
So,
you mentioned actually some practices that leave me with the impression that from the US, it may also be closer to look to the side of Asia, where you have certain marketing practices that are interesting as well. I'm just going to mention, say, junkets events for high rollers in Macau that are also really carried on golden arms and people specializing in these junket organizations and working closely with the casinos there. So you did mention some of these practices also in relation to online luxury cruises and so on. This is something we would typically not see in Europe, right?
no, I would say I worked in Asia a lot. Like I spent like maybe 4 years, 5 years dealing with the Asian market. It's different. It's different. The bonusing, they always, the typical bonus. So Asia is not familiar with free spins. Asia is not familiar with like, they give rebates. So basically cashback, you bet and you get a cashback. And of course, like there would be VIP treatment like you're mentioning, but also interested is cashback. US is different. They're trying to acquire play, and the cost of acquiring play is very expensive. It doesn't pay off. So as I see things moving in, it would be either few big players. So the small players, how long is it sustainable for the smaller operators like to continue this fight versus the big US giants with big pockets and with this marketing spend, like, because the spend is really crazy. If you pay 2,000 euro deposit bonus, it's a lot. It's a lot. You cannot continue run your business with 200-300% marketing budget. It doesn't pay off. And it's not like that the market opened up like 6 months ago, for example. It's been like open like for a very, very long time. It's like 4 years already.
Which leads us to an interesting phenomenon. And I actually suspected for a while that this could be the case. There may be situations where even though operators typically complain about gambling restrictions, about advertising restrictions, there may actually be situations where operators hope for some regulation and restrictions of advertising, because if you're just left with anything goes in advertising, those are no limits, right, to the budgets. And then it's pretty obvious that some may not be able to catch up in this incredible race. Yeah,
it's true, and especially European operators who are in US right now, they're all hoping that the regulation, like there would be some kind of regulation on advertisement, because they don't understand the value. Of course, they want to be in US as well, but it's simply not sustainable for them to do the business. It's not sustainable. It's hard to compete. So it would be interesting to see the development in the coming years potentially, because if there would be regulation on marketing, it will stabilize. Alternative scenario, eventually there would be like the smaller players cannot continue at this pace, and there would be like the big giants who would be taking over. And the thing is that with US players specifically, again, the feedback after talking to many operators is that if you don't give them bonuses, they just shift to another B2C. So you will lose the player. In Europe, there are some companies which don't give bonuses, but there's a strategy, and the players are still trusting. Like for example, in Sweden, Svenska, they don't give bonuses, but they have a big database of loyal customers, and it's okay. And there are other national lotteries and so on. That they have loyal players, and the players are there because of the brand, because of the trust, because of the everything. In US, based on feedback, talking to operators, players shift. So it's an interesting thing.
Okay, mobility has always been higher in the US than in Europe. Also, when it comes to labor force, people are willing to travel a lot in the US, still more than in Europe. We have now touched upon a series of very interesting themes, the good old days of being a gambling operator. We've compared US to Europe. We mentioned a few examples of sound regulation. Maybe towards the end, we could take a look at at the gaming sector and how notably the suppliers have evolved in this market. So if you take a look, say, a decade ago, who was there, and how does the picture look nowadays? It's probably become a bit more dynamic, right? We had some very well-known usual suspects back in the days.
Yeah, it's back in the days when I started to work on the supplier side with NetEnt, it was just three big giants. It was Playtech, Microgaming, and NetEnt. And depending on the market, like if you go, for example, UK, it was historically Playtech. If you go, for example, to Sweden and Nordics, it was like NetEnt, who will have like most of the market. Nowadays, the picture changed completely. So if you go around, it's completely different suspects. Like I don't think I will discover you America, but if I'll tell, like right now, for example, when you talk about supply, like Pragmatic is on everybody's, like everybody has Pragmatic, while before nobody was, like, not many people talking about it. Some companies, I was I don't want to mention name, like not sure the Paradise and anything, but there are some big guys which even a year ago people talk about them, you know, they had amazing products and everything, and nowadays you don't hear about them at all. And I was surprised, kind of opened my eyes a little bit as well. At the same time, you have so many newcomers. So as Relax, we do have our own content, but we have a large aggregation network. So we have maybe over 50 suppliers on the network, and we have a huge backlog on the integration with maybe another 150 just wanted to integrate. And nowadays, like people, they wouldn't, even if you're big, it's very difficult to get you on your integration pipeline because of resources, because of so many regulated markets are opening up and everything. So even the tier one operators, they don't have resources to do things.
Is this something, Nadiya, that you see that B2Cs really appreciate, that you also have a lot of aggregated content, not just your own content?
Yes, a lot. And the thing is, the key, like I was surprised. So I was in London, now there was Casino Bits in Malta, and everybody was complimenting actually how good is Relax because of the technical infrastructure, and everybody, and they were like telling that a lot of like suppliers were telling us that we want to be with this operator or with this one, and they will only take you through Relax. So it was really nice, of course, to hear. It was really, you know, good feedback, but also it opens from the different. So I'm very technical, like you mentioned at the beginning. So integration takes time, it takes you resources, and you have a lot of projects built up front. So it all comes down nowadays to costs, and cost can be resources. Technical resources are expensive. Development is expensive, especially considering all the markets. That also, you know, doing agreements, doing things, it's everything. And so it saves you a lot of headaches, it saves you a lot of things, and it also keeps your costs down, and you can get the games pretty fast. So this is an interesting model which is coming up. Again, there are a lot of aggregators out there. Some are good, some are not. So it would be interesting to see where the market is evolves, but I'm hearing that there are a lot of coming up more and more and more. But the supplier choice, it's like, there's so many suppliers, we are losing the track. It's like the choice is amazing, which brings me to the interesting. So when it comes to RNG, when it comes to live, it's a very different situation. Evolution is still dominating the market. Like, so Evolution, Playtech, there are like not a lot, but there are quite few of live dealers, but it's not comparable to what's happening on the RNG side. So it's an interesting thing to observe, in my opinion.
Wonderful. Nadiya, I think we've had a very rich tour d'horizon of the gambling industry over the last decade or even more. I want to make sure just to reach out briefly to the local audience also in Prague and check whether there are any questions or remarks from the audience. Maybe Sultan and his team can help us with this.
Nope. All I hear is growling stomachs.
Pardon me, Sultan?
All I hear is growling stomachs.
Okay, well, we don't want to stand in the way of a good lunch, but thank you very much again, Nadiya, for joining us. It's been an interesting ride, looking at the last 10, 15 years and how things have evolved. And of course, wishing you all the best for the continuation of your career. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. I think it's a pleasure to be here. Enjoy the show.